No wedding dress here today, unlike the time that the Noble Bachelor, Robert St. Simon, found the dress and shoes of his young American wife, Hattie Doran, floating here. Not surprising that he thought she might have drowned, since nearly 100 years before, another famous drowning had taken place in this very lake, the Serpentine in Hyde Park. That was of the poet Shelley's wife. It was rumoured that she had killed herself because of Shelley's affair with the 18-year-old Mary Wollstonecraft Godwin. Certainly it is true that less than 2 weeks later he married her, and she became Mary Shelley, the famous author of Frankenstein. Hattie Doran. Hattie is, of course, an abbreviation for Harriet, which is the same name as Shelley's poor drowned wife, Harriet Westbrook. Curious. Speaking of Lord St. Simon and his young American wife, this subject of American heiresses marrying British aristocrats is quite popular at the turn of the century. Oscar Wilde mentions it in his plays, and his story, The Canterville Ghost, centres on just such a relationship. Across the Atlantic, American writers like Henry James and Edith Wharton also treat of it. But the most famous example was in 1938, when King of England, Edward VIII, gave up his throne to marry the woman he loved, American heiress and divorcee Wallis Simpson. King George II's Queen, Charlotte, decided that she wanted a lake in the royal park, and so the royal gardener dammed the river, and this was made. It's interesting because it is the first time that a gardener tried to create a lake which appeared natural, and was probably the beginning of what was called the landscape movement, with practitioners such as Lancelot Capability Brown and Humphrey Repton, who made British parks look like wild nature. The parallel movement in art and literature was known as the Romantic movement, and in Britain the leading lights were poets such as Byron, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, and of course Percy Bysshe Shelley, whose unfortunate first wife ended her sad life in this very water. Another thing my Uncle Bodkin told me, whose mother's friend knew Dr. Watson, was that Watson considered the case of the Noble Bachelor to illustrate a rarely glimpsed human side of Holmes. He certainly did go to a lot of trouble to find the runaway wife and effect a kind of reconciliation between her, her real husband, and her would-be husband, Lord Robert. Still, I dare say Lord Robert was rather upset by the whole thing. I know I would have been.